If you've ever talked about slavery with a white person, one of the things you may have heard them say is, oh, well, it's only thanks to white people that slavery came to an end. And I want to give actually 4 reasons why this is a complete myth. The first thing you might hear, for instance, is that slavery has always existed. And the reason why this is usually said in these arguments is because what's trying to be done is a narrative that there's always been slavery, and it was only thanks to Europeans and white people finally being the ones to end this brutal institution. What this ignores, of course, is the fact that the transatlantic slave trade was the most massive expansion of slavery in history, with roughly 20 to 25 million slaves. Even the Roman Empire, which heavily relied on slavery, had at its peak roughly 5 to 10 million slaves. In the Arab slave trade as well, which was actually also a much longer time period, had 10 to 17 million slaves. And of course, the transatlantic slave trade, for instance, was far more brutal and involved hereditary slavery. I recommend you go check out the other video I did talking about this. Now, the second myth is also, especially if you're American, you've probably heard this, is the idea that Lincoln ended slavery. And Lincoln actually initially, his goal in the Civil War was to keep the Union together, and abolition was not necessarily on the agenda. In 1862, Lincoln said, if I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. But it was only once there were slaves who were escaping the South to come to the North and join the Union Army that Lincoln realized that he could use the cause of abolition to galvanize slaves to help the North. And so, in other words, it was the activity of slaves, it was thanks to slaves that they were able to end their own slavery, not because of Lincoln's own action in isolation. The third thing you also might hear is that Europeans ended slavery in Africa. One thing I've heard before is, oh, well, the British deployed many ships to end slavery, and while some of these ships may have been sent for humanitarian purposes, the majority of the ships were actually being sent to control the high seas and help expand the British Empire. The British were also, for instance, actually importing 80% of their cotton from the American South, while they were supposedly triumphing the abolition cause. Other European countries also used this argument of abolitionism to expand their colonies. One of the most brutal examples, of course, was the Belgian Congo, where while the Belgians were saying they were ending slavery, roughly 10 million Congolese people died, and forced labor camps were created. In other words, there was just a new form of slavery created there. And the fourth and final reason why white people ending slavery is a myth is because slavery still exists to this day. There's tens of millions of slaves across the world, and a lot of these are tied to the legacies of colonialism. For instance, there's still 1 million slaves in the Congo, often involved in mines that are mining important metals and resources that are used in electronics, and this mining makes Europeans and the corporations in Europe and North America quite wealthy, while the people in Africa continue to suffer. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please share it and give a like.